Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sunday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy. Going to take you through a busy Saturday in the SEC, a still pretty wet Saturday in the SEC, and get you ready for Sunday's action as well. Before we jump into anything specific, though, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Gear up today and take flight. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan brand gear for the entire family, available in-store and at academy.com. Unleash your greatness with Jordan Brand, now at Academy. All right, folks. First of all, sorry for the delay this morning. A little bit of a power outage here, much like the rest of the Southeast. Rainy, kind of gross here. So got a late start because, didn't little power outage. The internet was out. That's what happened. So, but we're here now. We're going to recap. Believe we're in the clear. We are fingers crossed, but we're going to recap Saturday around the league and then take a look ahead at Sunday. Some comments here. Morning to Ace Man. I see you there. HW says Hogs are back. Yeah, seems back in a big way. That sweep is huge. And if you're on the Texas side of it, you don't want to get swept like that. But on the other hand, I have to wonder if, especially with some of the stuff we saw where Schlossnagle was, pulling guys out of the game in the middle of games because he didn't like what he saw, and et cetera, et cetera. You just have to wonder if maybe this is not, this is maybe not the worst thing in the world for Texas to get punched in the mouth a little bit, and have to rebound from it, We'll obviously have to see. All right, lots of comments coming in. I love that. So I'll go ahead and let those accumulate. We'll go through them here in just a minute. Let's get to our game of the day. It was the second game of a doubleheader of the handful of doubleheaders we had yesterday. And it is Mississippi State 6, Kentucky 5. That was in 11 innings. Kind of a weird game. You could see from the line score here that it was 5-5 in the fourth inning, and I thought, oh boy, we've got, this has 14-12 written all over it. But then the teams just stopped scoring. And so until the 11th inning, it was kind of there were runners on base. It felt like it's not like the pitchers were cruising. It was just like the big hit was kind of missing for these teams. And they just couldn't put enough together to get it done. Some big home runs. It was home run happy, which is a little more rare this year in the SEC than it has been. But, you see here in the scoring summary, Hunter Hines, Garrick Fry, Sawyer Reeves for Mississippi State. Tyler Bell hit one that left the stadium. Big swing for him. But ultimately, Mississippi State got one more big hit. Joe Powell, this walk-off single in the 11th inning. He didn't have a hit to that point in game 2 after going 3 for 3 in game 1 of the doubleheader. But a big moment there for him. Let's scroll down to the pitchers here. Settling things down allowed Nick McKay to get through 6 innings. That was big. Simon Gregerson threw 3 pretty good innings until, he just got in that last inning. Similarly, bullpen worked great for Mississippi State. McPherson Williams in particular, just holding down those 6 1/3 innings to keep Kentucky off the board was obviously huge. And so Mississippi State sweeps that doubleheader. They won the first game 14-4. And now State can really get greedy. If you're State, you're looking for this sweep because then you're really cooking. You still have a series with Missouri ahead. Missouri's playing better against Georgia this weekend, but still doesn't have a win. So in the SEC, of course. So you feel if you can sweep this and you feel like we've got a real shot to sweep Missouri, you're really in pretty decent shape. So now if you lose this game and Kentucky salvages the game, obviously the path is still there, but it would involve a little more work down, the last 2 weekends, as opposed to feeling really good about it if you can sweep today. So when they say that, sweeps are really valuable, not just in the SEC, but in general, this is kind of the situation they're talking about, because it really does open the road wide open for Mississippi State to indeed get to the postseason if they can pull off the sweep today against Kentucky. So that's a big game for both sides, frankly, because also Kentucky, you salvage the game there and you're still more or less where you were going into the weekend. Yes, you're disappointed, especially given that you had an 11-inning game that you could have easily won. But so you're disappointed, but you're still kind of on the same path, which is, to be a regional team ultimately. All right, going to minimize this. Let's get to these comments here. A lot of them rolling in. Love to see that. Gunnar Files says, how about Arkansas pitching finally starting to show up? I mean, yeah, it's been a little bit of a thing with Arkansas this year where, there have been times where they've hit and haven't pitched and then vice versa. But yeah, the pitching was pretty solid this year or this weekend. Beidelshees was fine on Sunday or Saturday in this case, but you'll kind of take that, just because it's a Sunday guy, right? Just expectations for Sunday starters just have to be low. If you get something good out of a Sunday guy, you feel like you've got some house money. So I thought for what it was, Beidelshees was good enough. And we'll talk about some of the relief work for Arkansas here shortly. Hello, Sean. He says, first off, good luck to your Blues tonight. But how about those Stars? Yeah, NHL playoffs heating up. I do have a Game 7, the Blues. I'm a Blues guy. Against Winnipeg tonight. We're not expected to be competitive in the series. I had low expectations, frankly, about there. But a big night in as far as teams that yours truly roots for. Also a Game 7 with the Houston Rockets. I grew up in Houston, so I grew up a Houston sports guy, and then spent about 5 years. We didn't have hockey in Houston, obviously. Spent about 5 years in the St. Louis area, and so that's how I adopted the Blues. But the Rockets have been one of my first sports memories was the Rockets winning the title against the Knicks in '94. It's one of my first memories as a young sports fan. So the Rockets have really been a day one thing for me, but they haven't been good in a while. So this is kind of a pleasant surprise. I did not love they drew Golden State out of the chute, but such is life. All right, there's a little Joe NHL NBA corner. Now we'll move back to comments on the college baseball. Randy Peterson says, War Eagle, Dutton is still that dude. Agreed. He's such a good story. Such a good story on a couple of fronts. I mean, one is just Auburn needed somebody to be that guy. It was such an issue last year for them. So that's one. And then two is just, look, he's a veteran guy in the SEC. This is not some fresh-faced guy that Auburn brought from D2 or junior college or a freshman. Like, this is a guy who's been around the block in the SEC, and he just got better. Like, some of it's opportunity. Auburn gave him an opportunity that he wasn't going to get at LSU. But then with that opportunity, he's also gotten better. So it's just a really good story. And it goes to show that as much as sometimes it's easy to be cynical in this era of college baseball and talk about how, there's not really a lot of development happening anymore. Like, it's just player acquisition and player deployment. And I get that. And there's something to that. But development is still happening. So a guy like Sam Dutton is a great example of where that's still happening. Gigam Bart says, let's get the series today. Yeah, that's going to be a big Game 3 in College Station between LSU and Texas A&M. Two really good games between those two in the doubleheader yesterday. Nicholas Doherty asks after, he says, morning, Joe. Good morning, Nicholas. Who do you have more faith in for the rest of the season and postseason? LSU, Arkansas, or Texas? Boy, that is the question, isn't it? My first response is Arkansas, and I've been pretty consistent on Arkansas that I think they're actually the best team in the SEC. I feel like I've been pretty consistent on that really since Arkansas's offense became this, where it was like, oh boy, their lineup, it really is different than what we've seen. But I tell you what, and I don't mean this to hedge, but I'm just kind of giving you my thought process as I'm trying to answer this question. So my first guess, or my first response, just off the top of the head, was Arkansas. However, if Anthony Ionson's going to pitch a lot more like what we saw last night, suddenly that changes the calculus with LSU, because that's two guys who are as good as just about anybody in the country between him and Cade Anderson. And he's not going to pitch exactly like that every night, right? He's not going to throw a CG with one run allowed every night. But if that's the quality, the relative quality that LSU can expect, like, it's hard to turn them down as an option too. I think the balance of Arkansas, where I have a little more faith in Arkansas's lineup to do something like what it did this weekend against Texas, where it just blitzed the Texas pitching staff all weekend, essentially. That tends to be where I lean. So I'm leaning Arkansas or LSU. Those are the two teams I'm choosing between. And I think I lean Arkansas because of the balance, but man, with Ianson pitching like he is, That's a real 1A, 1B for me. But it's a very good question, because that kind of is the question right now. Is it feels like those three teams are really the ones that we're circling in the SEC, and trying to find the national title favorite out of that group as of this moment. Tennessee obviously is in that mix as well, but I think we've seen this weekend, like, yes, it's been a weird weekend in Knoxville, the rain and how that was handled and yada, yada, yada. But I do think there's been a little more vulnerability with Tennessee of late. That has me just a little more skittish with them. But look, I mean, they could win the resumption of the game, which is getting going here in about 40 minutes, a little less than 40 minutes. If they win that and they win the finale, it's like, well, okay, well, they're going to look the same. The worry will have been unfounded. But it does feel like Auburn has continued to expose some things with Tennessee this weekend. but it's hard to know, because this has been such a weird weekend in Knoxville. It's like you almost, regardless of the result, are going to have to kind of throw this weekend out a little bit. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't, but we're not going to be able to tell the difference, right? And it's just been such a weird deal. So, I don't know. That's a shoulder shrug there. Papa Dragon with a very good a headline here. Hogs hammer hulking homers to handle horns at home. Love that. By the way, just see how well I read that. I don't have anyone else here to applaud that, so I have to call it out myself. Yeah, that would be a good headline. I wonder, that'd be a good D1 baseball headline for what that weekend has been. Hey Joey, he says, chatting live from Lindsey Nelson Stadium. Vols need the bats going. Those are bats. I was looking closer at my screen to figure out why there was some sort of bird. But yes, yeah, that's been the thing, is like Tennessee. There's a few guys in the lineup that are scuffling right now, and it feels like the bats have not necessarily been there as consistently as they need them to be. So that is, I think you've hit on it there, Joey. That's the key for me as well. By the way, we have this joke at Inside D1 Baseball, Lindsey Nelson Stadium, and now I have to think about it every time I say Lindsey Nelson Stadium. One of our staffers accidentally just was talking about the stadium and said Leslie Nielsen Stadium, like the guy from Airplane. And now every time I read Lindsey Nelson Stadium, I have to stop and make sure I'm not saying it incorrectly. So I want to thank our D1 baseball staff for making that a thing for me. Gunnar brings up a good point here. This series probably benefited both teams. Arkansas needed the big spark, and Texas needed a wake-up call. I think that's exactly right. Like I said at the top, I just think Texas needed something to kind of shake them a little bit and say, like, look, this is not this easy. Like, you're not gonna just tap dance to SEC title. They may still win the SEC regular season title, but like, it's not going to be easy. So yeah, and then Arkansas, yeah, this feels like the type of series sweep that really can maybe send them off like a rocket ship. And if you subscribe to the hot, cold, hot theory, they're right on time. That theory, of course, being that the ideal trajectory for a team in college baseball is to start off hot, to kind of show what you're capable of, show your ceiling, and then hit a skid kind of in that, early to mid-April range, and then take off like a rocket ship as we head into May. And that's kind of what Arkansas has followed. So, who knows if that's real, but that trajectory is what Arkansas is on. And there are a lot of people I respect who think that's kind of the formula. Now you can't force that, right? You can't like, oh, the team's playing great, I really hope we drop some series in April. Like, you can't really make that happen. But if it happens organically, I think there is a little something to it. Ace Man says Ianson was insane yesterday. He's why LSU won, full stop. I mean, yeah, it certainly wasn't the offensive effort. Like, A&M's pitching did a nice job in those two games. And in the second game as well, a 2-1 game, but yeah, Ianson was just insane. Anything less than what he gave them, and A&M wins that game, right? So yeah, that I totally agree with you there. Abby on X says, how many wins does Auburn need to be a top 8? Well, I will first say we don't exactly know. Like, I always give the caveats. Mark would be proud of me to give these caveats. But I would generally say if their RPI stays where it is right now, they're sitting at 4 as of right this second. If their RPI is kind of in that same top 5-ish range, and they get, I would say, probably 18 SEC wins, which is 6 more, and that's not including, if they win the resumption, that's win 13, and they've one more game today. So 18 SEC wins with the top 5 RPI probably ought to do it, but again, it depends on what everyone else does. But I guess I'll just bottom line it this way: the RPI is fine and is probably going to be fine. You just got to continue to win some games, and out of the final 6 plus 2 is 8 games left, including the resumption today. You need to at least, come out 5-3 in those to feel pretty good about it. Now, Hoover can help. And if they get to the SEC tournament final and they also have 17 regular season wins, that might be enough. So there are some different permutations, but that's a general guideline I would give you. And they'll have more on that if you don't listen to the Nerdcast, D1 Baseball's podcast that puts together the field of 64. That'll be out Tuesday or Wednesday in your podcast feeds, and they'll break that down in a little more detail if you're interested in that, the machinations of it all. All right, let's see. Gickham Bart says Ianson was straight up dealing, made our guys look absolutely foolish. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that can happen. All right. I'm scrolling here. He also says, thankfully, we have Ben Royo. Yeah, man, I've said, people have asked me a lot about what's different for A&M versus the first few weeks of SEC play. And there are a lot of different answers, I think. But one of them has been just finding a different set of players. I would have never guessed Ben Royo would be a major contributor on this team. And I don't even mean that disrespectfully. It's just this team looks so talented. It's okay, he was a infielder at Rice who had one good year and otherwise was kind of an average player. And now he's doing big things at A&M. So, but it's him, it's obviously Terrence Keel. It's, Bear Harrison at the behind the plate, right? It's Blake Binderup, taking over at first base. There's a lot of just little things, but Ben Royo has been part of it. Gunner File says Ianson straight stole SEC pitcher of the week from Zach Root. Yeah, that's probably exactly right. Austin Larroquette says LSU bat's still cold. They have to figure out the offense. Agreed. I do have some excuse me. I do have some faith that they will figure that part of it out. But this is not an LSU offense that is really what it's been, right? Dylan Cruz and Tommy White are not walking through, right? And Jared Jones is swinging it better, so that definitely helps move them in the right direction. But this is not, one of the more dynamic offenses in the league. It's good enough, and especially when they pitch like they have this weekend so far in the 2 games. But yeah, it's I just don't know that it's going to be a really dynamic, physical, imposing lineup. I just don't know that this team is that. But they do have to get better than what they've been, right? They're clearly better than what they've shown the last 2 days. And credit A&M's pitching, but so I see your point. But also I think their ceiling offensively is just not necessarily where it has been the last, really since Jay Johnson's been there. All right. Ace Man says, Aggie baseball has been exhausting recently. Apologize for the throat clearing too. There's still the allergy stuff in the air, just been fighting it. Aggie baseball has been exhausting recently. Our last 5 SEC games came down to the last pitch and are basically toss-ups. We are 1-4 in such games. Yeah, it feels like there are a couple. Kentucky's another one. They have so many 1- and 2-run losses. It's unbelievable. If half of those 1-run games for Kentucky goes the other way, we'd be talking about them as a host and maybe a top 8, right? Yeah, it's interesting. Walker Hayes asks, do you think Vandy is an Omaha team? I think they very well could be. I'm not ready to go there yet, but I feel better about that possibility now than I did certainly 4 to 6 weeks ago, because the pitching has continued. When Connor Fennell first started pitching well, I was like, okay, this is fun, but is this going to last? And so far it has. And so you feel better about that. JD Thompson has been consistent. He's shown that consistency. So that has been heartening to me to see from their standpoint. The bullpen has stayed strong. And, by the way, they've done a nice job offensively. Again, much like LSU, this is not a high ceiling lineup. But if RJ Austin swings it better, which he has, if they're able to just kind of, if Brody Johnson can kind of continue to work out of the slump he was in, that'll be helpful. But they've had enough guys who have been consistent, and Riley Nelson is probably chief among them. They've had enough offensively to get it done with how consistent their pitching has been. And so they definitely have Omaha upside, which I don't think I would have said a month ago, 6 weeks ago, but I'm not quite ready to put them in that same category as, Arkansas, LSU, and Texas, where I'm like, if they just play their game, they'll be an Omaha team. I'm not quite there with Vandy. I still think they could get got by somebody, but they are on a better course, I would say, than I thought they would be. Sean Miller says another tough day on the host bubble. Yeah, it really kind of has been. And if you're a team like, I know you mentioned it here, OU probably taking TCU's regional. I think Oklahoma has been a big benefactor of kind of that carnage with that class of teams on the host bubble. Oklahoma is very much back in it. I'm scrolling. Their RPI 17s, but that's up 6 spots from where they started the weekend. So yeah, they're definitely in the mix there. That's just got to take advantage of those situations. Eric Simmons asks, is Florida a regional host with 15 SEC wins? I think they have a chance to host a regional. I think they have a chance, but if you're 15 SEC wins, you got to make a run in Hoover. There have been examples of teams with 15 SEC wins hosting, or in other leagues. I think Virginia Tech out of the ACC did it one time back in 2013. If you have 15, you got to do something in the conference tournament. You have to get at least 16, at least historically, at least 16 in the regular season to host. And oh, by the way, if you have 16, your RPI better be top 10, something like that. A fringy RPI with 16 wins might not get you there. But they could if Florida stays hot, and they've had a rough weekend weather-wise too. They got suspended again yesterday, and so they've got a busy day today. But if they stay hot, yeah. Eric Simmons says time to be concerned about Tennessee. I mean, I just think this team is not last year's team. I think if we compare them to anything but last year's team, I still think they look really, really good, and I still have them in that mix at the top of the league. But it's not, there are a lot of things where it's just not quite as crisp as it was last year. But that team won the national title, right? That was the best team in college baseball last year. So I think it's kind of an unfair comparison. But so, I mean, concerned about them, I guess, if you were expecting them to kind of repeat the quality of last year, I suppose. But generally speaking, no, I still think they're in that mix. And like I said, if they win the resumed game today and then they win the finale and they win that series against Auburn, I think it's the worry will end up looking a little bit overblown. Whether that's fair or not to make that judgment based on that, I think that's going to be the reality. Josh Willie says, shout out to Reese Robinette. Could have transferred out for playing time, but stuck it out. Came into Sunday with 0 homers and 2 RBIs. Hits 2 home runs with 6 RBI in that game. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's credit to Dave Van Horn and that staff. I mean, some of it's injury based, as I think you pointed out to me, Josh, the other day. But I do think there is a lot of credit. I think a lot of credit is due to Dave Van Horn and his staff, because they're one of the teams that does a really good job. Of keeping the entire roster ready, right? Nobody gets buried on that roster. So they have a guy like Robinette they can just kind of pull out there and he's just ready to go. It's not always going to go this well when you bring a guy off the bench to start some games, but they do a good job of keeping the entire roster ready to compete. Sven Kreuzberg says LSU would be happy to have a Dutton. They would be, but their pitching has been good enough to where, especially if Kason Evans continues to be a thing in the rotation, Dutton probably would have been in the same situation he'd been in at LSU, which is just that, yeah, he could start for us, but who are you going to take out, right, to start Sam Dutton? So I think it's been a good pair all around. Jim in Arlington, did Oklahoma surprise you by winning the series against Ole Miss? How do you feel about their hosting chances now? Their pitching is starting to open eyes. Yeah, I mean, certainly if I think my eyes have been open to how good their pitching could be, right? Just given the quality of stuff there on that staff. And it's, Crossland has been up and down, and Malachi got off to a relatively slow start this season. And it took a while in the bullpen, like Jason Bowden got off to a really slow start. But it has started around in a form. Crossland is still a little up and down, but he was great yesterday. Malachi has been pitching better of late. Like, it seems like he's on the right path. The bullpen has been shored up a little bit. Obviously, Dylan Crooks has nails the back end. So yes, that's a really good pitching staff. I talked about their hosting chances earlier. I think if they, certainly if they can get today's game, I think you feel really good about their hosting chances. Now they have to finish strong. You can't fall off here. That's the thing, is the difference between hosting and being a 2 seed here, from an SEC perspective, tends to be just like a range of 1 or 2 wins. It's a pretty knife's edge thing. But I would say they actually didn't surprise me. No, because I think a couple things. One is I think I like Oklahoma's team better than Ole Miss right now. And I think it's been true for a few weeks, whereas Ole Miss has kind of come back. Ole Miss at one point peaked in the top 10, perhaps something like that. And they've just been kind of coming back to the pack. And also home field is just strong in the SEC. Like, when in doubt, go with the home team. So that's kind of where I land. But I just like Oklahoma's team better than Ole Miss. That the pitching is definitely better. And especially now, Ole Miss had an injury with Braden Jones in their bullpen. He's out for the year now, so they're one arm short. But so I like Oklahoma's pitching better, and the offenses to me feel similar, different in the way they get it done, but similar in terms of kind of where I'd put them quality wise. And so I just like Oklahoma's. I just think Oklahoma's better. And then having the series at home, certainly not surprised to see that result. Randy Peterson says, I don't think it's time for concern for Tennessee. I think Auburn is a little bit better than what everyone thought. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, definitely true. On X, Marsha Mayhew says, how about Bama versus Vandy today? Yeah, big toss-up game. Zane Adams on the mound for Alabama. Obviously, he has really should be a good matchup because it's Adams versus Fennell. So that should be a lot of fun. Adams certainly has both guys have the potential to control that game. And really, it could be a really well-pitched Sunday finale. But again, we talk about this time of year, you're able to kind of see the impact of each individual win. And these are both teams that, with a strong finish, could be top 8s. They're both in position to host right now. But the winner of this series is probably going to feel pretty good about a top 8. And if it's Alabama, both teams still might feel decent about a top 8 because Vanderbilt's RPI, as it sits right now, is 5. And that's obviously in that range. So, big rubber match here. Both teams probably feel like they really need it. UGA back to number 1 in RPI, says Ace Man. I will flip over. Yep, that's true. A couple wins against Missouri. Wasn't pretty. They have not been pretty, the wins against Missouri. But Georgia back to 1 in RPI. At this stage, I don't see them as the number 1 overall seed just because of RPI. I think they'll probably be, if the season ended today, they'd be a top 8, but I don't think they'd be the number 1 overall seed. But, having that number 1 RPI does obviously insulate you a little bit. It does make it a little bit easier to get a top 8, even if your SEC record or your quad 1 record or what have you aren't as good as others. That number 1 RPI is going to be hard for the committee to push past to move them down very much further than the top overall spot. Judge Smales says, crazy how many 1-run games Kentucky has lost in the SEC this year. Yep. That's that. They've still had a pretty decent season. So it's hard to think too much about missed opportunities, but yeah, it is crazy that they could, like I said, we could be talking, we could be talking about them as a potential host if a few games go a different way. Auburn needs to win more on the road, Randy Peterson says. Yeah, like that. They have not played well on the road this season. That has definitely been a thing for Auburn, for sure. Okay, Sven asks, who should state hire, I think is what that's supposed to say, as our next head coach. I would love to have Wes Johnson. That's an option. It's a little too early to tell who they're really tracking towards, but I think Wes Johnson is a great option there. I've mentioned Brian O'Connor as somebody who I'd be interested in. That he's not coached in the SEC, but he's had a lot of success in the ACC. I don't think Nick Mingione is taking that job. The buyout is pretty formidable, but he's a guy that understandably State would be happy with. But Wes Johnson's certainly a name, like a name to consider. Like he's the success he's had at Georgia. He'll have every opportunity to do the same stuff he's doing at Georgia now with State. So I think that would I think that makes a lot of sense. But the tricky thing here for State that we talked about is just that, if you're looking for a proven head coach, and especially if you're looking to poach a sitting SEC coach, whether that's a head coach or an assistants you can get a little earlier. Wes Johnson was someone who got hired midseason when he got hired to be the head coach at Georgia. But if they're going to get a proven head coach, they're going to have to wait until after the postseason, probably, or at least until after that team they're interested in the coach of is eliminated, right? So State fans are gonna. I know this is hard, but State fans are probably going to have to be a little patient with this hire because they're just going to have to wait on some guys to be done with their seasons, probably. All right. Scrolling. I see your post about the Michigan Ohio State game, Sean. Yeah, Ohio State being that bad this year is something I did not have on my bingo card. Scrolling. Randy Peterson says, speaking of the Blues, how about those Panthers? Yeah, shout out to the Florida Panthers, the Ice Cats, as they call them. Bo Molinari says, wait, it's not Leslie Nielsen Stadium? It should be. I would just, who says no to that other than Lindsey Nelson himself? Who says no if we just made it Leslie Nielsen Stadium? Or what about for a day, as a promo, right? All right, scrolling. Todd Harris says, my Cats just cannot find any clutch hitting late in games. The amount of one-run losses because they can't find a way to get runs late is a problem. Pitching had 7 straight scoreless innings late and still lost. I think that's right, Todd. And clutch hitting is so tough, but I think part of the reason why it feels so tough for Kentucky is just there's not that same level of where last year it was like, hey, if we can just get the lineup around to Waldschmidt, or to Nicholson, right? You kind of had those guys you knew in those moments were going to come up big. And this team's a little less of that, whether it's because the team is pretty young, although Tyler Bell's probably a guy you want up there in those situations, whether it's because the team is young or because some of the older guys just aren't the offensive threats that some guys they have had are. I think it's kind of a combination of those things. All right, scrolling through here, trying to get through quickly because we're at 33 minutes already, but it's been fun. It's been a fun show. Hunter Johnson says, how many wins does State need to make the tournament? I saw Mark responded to you with 13-14. That is more or less correct. 13 gets you in the conversation, and then it matters. It matters kind of some other things like the RPI matters, the comparisons to other teams that are in that range, quad 1 wins matter, but 13 at least gets you in the conversation. Mark says, Joe, that's 2 days in a row with your phone dinging during the show. Yes, my apologies. It is that time of year. I'm getting pinged a lot this time of year of various things. Randy Peterson says Ike Irish has been on a mission the last 10 SEC games. Yeah, been really good. They need him to kind of be the engine of that lineup. All right. So a lot of comments. I love the comment. A lot of guys. I love seeing you guys talk between each other in the chat. That's always kind of cool to see. And also, by the way, I appreciate that. Pardon my language here, but that you guys aren't assholes to each other. That's kind of nice. It's a nice civil conversation. Love to see that. All right. Tum2 says, how far does Texas drop in the rankings after getting swept by the Hogs? Yeah, they, had they just lost that series, they might have still been number 1, but getting swept is just too hard to ignore. Not far though. Just they've built up they've insulated themselves so well because of how well they were playing before. So not far. And in the big picture, it didn't hurt anything about their season. They're still tracking to be a national seed and all that stuff. All right. The strike zone in the Arkansas game yesterday was the worst I've ever seen, says Jacob Hammock. That happens. Patrick, I will defer this question. How far is Notre Dame away from a next four, first four out? I will defer that to the Nerdcast this week, but they certainly helped their case this week. All right. I'm scrolling here. Mark says Jay Johnson to Mississippi State, Vitello to LSU, Chris Burke to Tennessee. That's big news. I'll have to text Berkey and let him know. He's going to be excited about that. He's going to be excited about his little about his promotion there. All right. Max says Einstein said, "I can't hear you." That was after the game was over. He did the old Hulk Hogan hand to the ear there. All right, quickly, hitter and pitcher of the day. We still haven't gotten to that. Let me do that real quick, and then we'll get you guys out of here. I appreciate all the comments and love the interaction. Hitter of the day is Easton Carmichael for Oklahoma in that win against Ole Miss to secure the series. 4 for 5, 2 home runs. Mississippi State, a few guys in that doubleheader. I mentioned Joe Powell, big day for him because he also had the walk-off hit in game 2. Ben Royal for Texas A&M, talked about him. For LSU, Josh Pearson, Ethan Fry, games 1 and 2 respectively. Bunch of guys for Arkansas, just a big day offensively, including Reese Robinette, talked about him. 2 home runs, 6 RBIs, kind of out of nowhere there. All the way down, Jalen Flores, big game. Caden Pierre for Missouri, Garrett Staten for Alabama, but Easton Carmichael, the hitter of the day, at 4 for 5. All right, let's get over to pitcher, although there's not a lot of suspense about this one. The pitcher of the day is Anthony Ianson with that complete game against A&M. 1 run allowed, 14 strikeouts, but a lot of good pitching performances. And oh, by the way, like I think I've talked about this in the show, but home runs are down in the SEC this year. And I think one way that I started to notice that is that, last year doing the show, it felt like we'd have decent pitcher of the day nominees after Friday, but then after Saturday's games, it was like finding pitchers to put on this list was a real chore. This year, not so much, in part because the ball's just not flying as much, and it's made for the little more balanced game. But Ryan McPherson and Nate Williams, great relief effort in game 2 for Mississippi State. Cade Anderson and Ryan Prager, great duel in the first game of that doubleheader. Cade McCoy in game 2, he's been a revelation in the bullpen of late and just a freshman, so his future very bright for A&M. Dylan Carter in relief for Arkansas did a good job holding off the horns, allowing Arkansas to get a lead and expand their lead. 2 2/3 strong innings. Cade Crossland mentioned his start. Missouri, a couple guys in this list against Georgia. Sam Horn, he's the two-sport guy, the quarterback who has just returned to the mound. 3 strong innings. Brock Lucas went 10 up and 10 down to finish that game for Missouri. Ultimately, Georgia does get the win 5-2. But Missouri playing a little better. Colton Smith for Georgia gave up a home run in the first inning, but then really allowed nothing else the rest of the game to Missouri. And then Riley Quick, excellent outing for Alabama to set up that rubber game with Vanderbilt today. 6 strong innings, 9 strikeouts. But pitcher of the day is Anthony Ianson. And Gigam Bart says, Cade McCoy pitching with a torn meniscus, by the way. As someone who has torn a meniscus, you can do a lot more than people think with a torn meniscus. Now, I wasn't trying to play Division I college baseball, but if you move wrong, or if like you do something, like you'll be in a lot of pain for a couple of days, and then it'll subside, and you can do. But it's just kind of an annoying injury as much as anything else. So definitely been there. Okay. Game of the day today, honestly, here in about 10 minutes, the resumption of Auburn, Tennessee, because I have no idea how that's going to play out. Ben McKee has reported that Liam Doyle is going to start on the mound for the resumption for Tennessee. So that's kind of cool, a cool wrinkle. AJ Russell will start the finale for Tennessee, but that resumption is big. Tennessee needs it. Auburn's trying to get greedy and win that series in Knoxville. So as soon as I finish here, I'm going to turn around because my TV is back there behind me. I'm going to flip that on and turn that game on, and we'll see how it goes. But so that's kind of the resumption, I think, is the game to watch here, or the inning to watch, because it might just end up being one inning of baseball. But that's kind of what I've got my eye on. But good rubber matches today as well. A&M, LSU, Alabama, and Vanderbilt should be interesting stuff as well. Plenty to watch today. So enjoy the baseball. I will talk to you guys again Friday morning as we preview Week 13 around the SEC. And we will talk to you then.